What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to do a full story video. A full story video is when I sit down and take a bunch of videos that tell one overarching story and combine them together into one big video. Now, today's full story video is going to be about, well, Cable. You see, I kind of want to do a full story video of the early days of the 1990s with Cable comics. So for example, in this video, you're going to have Cable Blood and Metal and the first 4 issues of Cable's first solo series after Blood and Metal in one big video to kind of give you guys the idea of what was the early 1990s like when it came to Cable just appearing in Marvel Comics, being this brand new hero that everybody loved so much. But either way, I do hope you enjoy today's comic book video. Okay, so it's time for us to continue our coverage over X-Men comics. And now we pick up with Cable's Blood and Metal. Now, Blood and Metal is actually Cable's first solo series in Marvel Comics. Now, here's the catch. It's only a 2-part story arc, 2 issues. That's really it. But also, these 2 issues are each 40 pages long. So we got to cover like 80 pages when it comes to this story arc. Now, for Blood and Metal, here's the catch. It does take place right before the Executioner Song event. Now, if you saw my videos when it came over to that event right there, you would saw that in the middle of that event, Cable appeared out of nowhere. Apparently, he was gone for a good while. And the reason why, because what happened in this story arc right here. Now, on top of that, when it comes to Blood and Metal, it also established why the Wild Pack, aka the Six Pack, truly hate Cable for. Now, remember, when it came to Cable, he had a team of characters before the X-Force team, and they were called the Wild Pack at first, but over time, they had to change their name over to the Six Pack for a very good reason. Matter of fact, we'll talk more about that reason as we go through today's video. But either way, we had established in X-Force comics that when it came to the Wild Pack, they truly did hate Cable a lot, but we had no idea why. Blood and Metal gives us that reason why they actually hate him, but also tells us where Cable was when it came to the early parts of the Executioner Song event, because he appeared on part 2 or part 3 of the actual story arc of the Executioner Song. And so getting into the opening pages of this actual story arc, we do pick up 10 years in the past, where we pick up with Cable and also his Wild Pack. Now at this time, they're calling themselves the Wild Pack. It's going to change very soon, but for right now, they're called the Wild Pack. But for Cable and his team, they're currently in Iran for a mission. Now, we do learn that they are doing a mission for a character known as Mr. Tolliver. Now, he is a character that we had actually talked about in our coverage over X-Force. Now, remember, in our coverage, we had established that something happened between Cable and also Mr. Tolliver to have Cable actually hate Tolliver with a lot of passion. And so when it comes to Blood and Metal, we kind of get a tad bit more information about the actual hatred between those 2 characters. But at this point in time, 10 years ago, they're just doing a job for Tolliver to go over to Iran to tear down a building, which they were able to do very easily. And now they can get paid from Tolliver. But now we have to jump back over to the present day, where we actually pick up in a museum in Paris. Now, we do pick up with a group of characters who work for the Mutant Liberation Front. Now, remember, this is a group of characters who work for the character known as Stryfe. Now, at first, we were kind of left to believe that their main goal was to attack different government agency buildings that were being used to kind of hurt the mutant race in different kind of ways. But then down the road, we saw that Stryfe had other plans behind the scenes going on. And so when it comes to the actual group, they have broke inside the museum in Paris to steal an artifact. Now, the artifact they're currently stealing is the same one we saw back in the Executioner Song event, the one you had Stryfe use to stab Apocalypse with. But while you have the actual group trying to get their hands on the actual item, you then have one of their members get shot in the back of the head by Cable. Because by this point in our coverage over X-Men comics, Cable has gone officially solo. And so this is him saying, like, listen, I have too many enemies out there that I need to handle. And one of them is actually Stryfe and his group of mutants called the Mutant Liberation Front. And so for Cable, he got word that they would be here to try to steal this artifact. And so he arrived just in time to actually stop them. Now, they do try to fight against him at first, but they realize it's a lost cause. And so you have the actual group retreat. And of course, they have to leave behind their dead friend. But either way, you have Cable being able to lift the dead body of Sumo up to retrieve the artifact that they were trying to steal. Now, for Cable, the question is right now, why in the world were they trying to steal this certain artifact? But now we have to jump over to G.W. Bridges. Now, G.W. Bridge is actually a SHIELD agent, but when it comes to G.W., he was part of Cable's Wildpack team in the past. Now, recently, when it comes to G.W., he was assigned a brand new team, a team to go after Cable. And here's the reason why. You see, back over in X-Force comics, we had established that X-Force is not really afraid to cross the line when it comes to getting a job done. And so because of that, well, they became most wanted in America. And so for GW, he was kind of assigned a new task force to go after Cable. Now, we see GW going over to Department K. Now, Department K is a secret government branch in Canada, and we currently see them working on a new project, really an old project, and that would be Weapon X. Now, the code name did belong to Wolverine in the 1980 comics for Marvel, but by the 1990s, they gave that code name over to a different character, and that would be Garrison Kane. Now, Garrison Kane has no actual powers. You see, for Garrison, he was given cybernetic enhancements, so he's basically a cyborg. Now, for Garrison, he was also part of the Wildpack team as well. But for Garrison, in a recent story arc, he got seriously injured. And so you had Department K begin to repair him. Now, also for Garrison, he believes that Stryfe is actually Cable, because you have Stryfe go ahead and take off his helmet one time to reveal his actual face. But of course, his face looks just like Cable. And so for Garrison, he believed that Cable was actually the leader of the Mutant Liberation Front. Except now you have GW here saying, hey, some things got really crazy with Cable recently, because you have GW showing Garrison the tape of Cable fighting against the Mutant Liberation Front in Paris in that museum. And so for Garrison, he's very confused, because to him, he believes that Cable is the actual leader of that group, but at the same time, the actual leader of X-Force. And so for Garrison, he's kind of like, wait a second, if Cable is the actual leader of the Mutant Liberation Front, then why would he go after his own people and actually kill them off? Something's going on here. And so for GW, he tells Garrison, yeah, I know, and that is why I need you to find Cable to get some answers. And so then leaves Garrison going over to meet a character known as Hammer. Now, we don't know much about Hammer, but we do learn here that apparently Hammer is paralyzed from the waist down. And apparently the reason why he is paralyzed is because of Cable. And so the reason why you have Garrison coming over to Hammer, because Hammer might know about all the different bases that Cable has across the world. And hopefully one of those safe houses can give Garrison the chance to hopefully find Cable. Now we do jump over to Cable. Now we do see Cable currently in Cairo. Now with Cable in Cairo, he's meeting up with a curator. Now this curator is examining the artifact that Cable was able to protect earlier in Paris. But for Cable, he wants to know more about the actual artifact. Now the curator does tell Cable that the artifact is actually part of a very unique set of different artifacts because each piece belongs to a different century. Now, for Cable, he does find that very unique. Now, before he is actually able to know more about it, he wants to know where is the other pieces at. And apparently, one of the pieces is actually here in Cairo. And so for Cable, he knows if Stryfe went after one artifact, then sooner or later, he'll go after the other ones, like the one in Cairo. And so when you have Cable arrive at this museum, he is then confronted by more members of the Mutant Liberation Front. Now, in this group, there is a character we have to talk about, and that will be Fire Fist. Now, when it comes to Fire Fist, he was actually part of X Factor, the original X Factor team. And technically, he was not part of the team, he was more of a trainee, soon to be member of X Factor. But then at the tail end of his run on the team, he did join the New Mutants, but then he was captured by the Mutant Liberation Front and just taken away. And so now we see him as an actual member of the group. Now, back in, I want to say, the Executioner Song story arc, it was told to us that Fire Fist is actually being mind controlled, that he does not want to be there at all. Either way, for Cable, he feels bad that he was not able to keep Fire Fist on the New Mutants when he had took over that team at the late end of that run. Either way, you do have Cable fight against them in the middle of this museum. Now it's time for us to talk about the whole idea of why Cable had to change the name of the Wild Pack over to the Six Pack. And here's the reason why. So we jump back 7 years ago where we pick up with the Wild Pack, Cable's team, meeting up with Mr. Tolliver's assistant. Now, in the 3 years they had worked for Tolliver, they never had met him actually. But we do learn that the assistant tells the team they have to change their name. And the reason why, because in Marvel Comics, there already was a Wild Pack team, and that Wild Pack team was Silver Sable's team. And so you had the assistant tell the Wild Pack, like, hey guys, listen, the name the Wild Pack is owned by Silver Sable. You need a new name. And so while they were trying to think of a new name, they had pulled out a 6-pack of beer. And they're like, got a name for us, guys? Call us a 6-pack. And just like that, their name was no longer the Wild Pack, it was now the 6-pack. Now, after that, you then have the team go on another mission for Mr. Tolliver, where they went over to Afghanistan. Now, when they had arrived, they were attacked by Soviet armed carriers. Now, for our heroes, they were able to actually take them down very easily. But for Domino, she finds this hidden hatch, and she kind of wondered where it goes to. And so you have Cable open up the actual hatch, where they find this secret base hidden in this area in Afghanistan. Now, for our heroes, they weren't really assigned to go deep into the actual base, but for Cable, he realized there's something off about this base. This base seems very new, too new, basically saying the tech in that base could possibly be from the future. Cable's future. And so you have Cable go deeper into the actual base alongside his new team 6-pack. And so as they go deeper and deeper into the actual base, they realize that this base is being run by no other than Stryfe. And so this was the moment where Cable realized that Stryfe was also back in the past with him as well. But now we have to go back to the present day. And here's the reason why, because we pick up with Cable in one of his safe houses where he does as his computer to kind of look through all the different information about all these different artifacts that have some kind of weird connection to one another. Because all of these artifacts belong to different centuries. Like, what is the actual connection? Except you have the computer say, like, hey, I am no longer able to actually do that because your safe house has been officially breached. Now, the ending of this chapter is really important for a lot of different reasons. Let me explain why. Because you do have Cable begin to fight against Garrison Kane. He was the one who had actually breached the base of Cable. It's while you have the two characters fighting, we are establishing that something happened between Cable and his old crew, but it was something that happened to Hammer because of Cable. Now, for Garrison Kane, he also shows Cable why he's there for. And he says, listen, I finally figured out you are actually Stryfe. Now, here's the big problem with this whole idea because as we saw in the last section, the entire team, the six pack, they all saw Stryfe. But for some strange reason, now you have Garrison say, oh, I believe that you are Stryfe because he then shows a hologram of Stryfe taking off his helmet to reveal that he has the same face as Cable. Now, this was also the moment where Cable learned that Stryfe had his face. Before that, Cable had no idea what Stryfe actually looked like. But now we can jump over to the second chapter of Cable, Blood, and Metal. Now, in the opening pages of this chapter, we do pick up with the idea that Cable and Garrison are now on the same page, where it does seem like Garrison kind of believes that now Cable and Stryfe are not the same person. But on top of that, for Garrison, he's still kind of on the edge, want to make sure that he can officially trust Cable. Either way, you do have the two characters head over to Japan. Now, when they do arrive in Japan, they head over to the Ashita clan stronghold. Now, remember, the Ashita clan was actually being led by Mariko, the ex-lover of Wolverine. And the reason why I say ex-lover, because, well, she died a while back. Not a while back, really like a few videos ago when it comes to our coverage over the X-Men. But either way, after she had died, her half-brother had officially taken over the entire clan, and that would be the Silver Samurai. But either way, when it comes to Cable and Garrison, when they do arrive at the actual stronghold, they do have to fight against different members of the actual clan. But then once you have Garrison and Cable being able to defeat most of the ninjas and also somewhat stop Silver Samurai in his tracks, you do have Cable explain why they are there for. You see, he has another artifact that Cable knows that sooner or later Stryfe will possibly come after it. And so is Cable saying, we want to take your artifact and replace it with a fake one to trick somebody who is actually looking for it. Now we have to jump back over to the ending of the last chapter of this video where we had Cable in the six-pack 7 years ago in Afghanistan finding a secret base that was being controlled by Stryfe. Now, when it comes to this chapter, we are now establishing that Stryfe was actually working alongside with Tolliver. You see, when it came to Tolliver, he had a route for opium. And apparently the reason why he hired a six-pack was to take out the Soviet armed carriers who were going to actually, well, ruin the route for Tolliver. And so because of that, you had a six-pack realize that they were basically being used as a way to kind of help out a drug route for Tolliver. And Stryfe, who's also working for Tolliver, is also part of that drug ring. Now for Cable, he knows Stryfe because they both come from the future. And so you have Cable trying his best to take out Stryfe. Now Stryfe was able to grab a few charges and actually set them to explode. But he didn't tell Zero to grab him and get the heck out of there. Now for our heroes, they realize that they're not most likely going to be able to escape in time. But then you have Cable also being able to teleport the entire team out of there before the base blows up. And so now we are establishing that Stryfe and Tolliver were working together. But this kind of moves Tolliver becoming an enemy for Cable in the six-pack as well. But now we have to jump back over to the present day. Now, when we do, we pick up with Stryfe walking into a bar in Mexico where he's meeting up with a character known as, well, Mr. Richer. Now, we're technically told that Richer is actually the uncle to Richter, who's part of X Factor. Now, for Richer, he has the mask, and apparently there was a tracker that was left behind by Stryfe and his crew a long time ago. Except when you have Stryfe go to examine the actual mask, he realized it's a fake, which means Cable has the real one. And now he's wondering, what is Cable actually up to? Now, once we do jump back over to Cable and Garrison Kane in the present day, we do see the two characters kind of telling us what the deal was between each of them. The deal they made was that you're going to have Garrison help out Cable to hunt down Stryfe and hopefully capture him, but in return, Cable is going to help out Hammer because something happened many years ago when it came to the six-pack. Something involving Cable that led to Hammer actually becoming paralyzed. And so because of that, it's Garrison saying it's your fault that Hammer is the way he is. Now, with that being said, for Cable, he said, listen, I made some big mistakes. Some of the things I did, I know they were completely wrong. But at the same time, when I look back at those days, I realized that sometimes those mistakes I made were the right ones actually when it came to different decisions going on at the moment. And for Garrison, it's still not okay because, well, Hammer is paralyzed. But now we have to jump back 6 years ago. Now, when we do, we are technically establishing that by this point, Cable and the six-pack were actually on the run. And the reason why, because they broke that contract 7 years ago from the present day, when it came to Cable and the six-pack finding that secret base where Stryfe was working out of, because their contract was not supposed to find that secret base. Their contract was not supposed to have them actually get that base destroyed because Stryfe blew it up. And so because of that, you now have Tolliver sending out different crew to hopefully find Cable and the six-pack and to hopefully, well, kill them off. Now, while you have Cable and his crew fighting against a new crew of people who are trying to kill him, we kind of see the crew is still very upset with Cable because it was him who broke the contract. It was him going out of his way to figure out what was happening inside that base, where of course he found Stryfe. Now, while you have all the guys arguing, you have Domino being able to take out the crew who was sent by Tolliver to actually kill them off. But now we have to jump back over to Cable and also Garrison Kane in the present day, where we do see them going over to Cancun to an actual pyramid. Here's the reason why, because remember, they had taken the mask that Silver Samurai had, knowing that sooner or later Stryfe would come after the mask. And they also had put a tracker inside the mask. Well, Stryfe had found that tracker, and he placed the tracker inside this pyramid. Now, when our heroes do arrive in the actual pyramid, they do learn it was an actual trap set up by Stryfe and the Mutant Liberation Front. Now, after a few pages where you do have our heroes being able to fight against the Mutant Liberation Front, you did have Stryfe appear, being able to grab Garrison Kane from behind. But you didn't have Stryfe take off his mask to reveal that, yes, him and Cable are clones of one another. And the question is right now, who is actually the real version of Cable? So now we have to jump back to the past to officially learn what happened in the past that led to Hammer becoming paralyzed thanks to Cable. So we jump back 6 years ago, and we do see our heroes going after Stryfe once again in one of his secret bases. Now, when they had arrived at the base, you had Hammer begin downloading information about Stryfe that they could use against him. But while they were trying to download that information, Stryfe appeared and grabbed Garrison Kane from behind. Now, when it comes to Garrison, he was basically a hostage. But you have Stryfe said, if you want Garrison back, you need to hand over the CD that has all that info that you had just collected about me. Now, for Cable, he was not really down with the idea of handing over that information. He was trying his best to find a better way to keep that info, but to also save Garrison. But for Hammer, he's all like, listen, I hate the idea of us possibly losing Garrison all because some info that may or may not actually help us. And so you have Hammer begin to hand over the actual CD that contains all that info. And for Cable, he's all like, I cannot lose that info. And so he shoots Hammer in the back. That is the reason why Hammer is actually paralyzed. Now, you had Hammer drop the CD, and you had Stryfe being able to use his powers to grab the CD and get the heck out of there. Now, for Cable, he had to grab his team and also get the heck out of there. And the reason why? Because the entire place blew up. And so when we jump back over to the present day, we actually see Cable and Stryfe in a standoff because right now you have Stryfe holding on to Garrison Kane in the present day as well. And you have Stryfe say, listen, if you want Garrison back, you have to hand over the professor. Now, the professor is actually an AI system that Cable uses. And so you have Cable agree to the actual deal, but only if Stryfe begins to hand Garrison Kane over to Cable, then he'll hand over the professor. And so you do have the two characters begin to do the actual exchange, except you didn't have Cable go ahead and burn the CD that had supposedly contained the professor. And so to Stryfe, he realized that he was just played, and he begins to do battle against Cable. Now, while you have the two characters battling against each other, you didn't have Garrison being able to get back into the actual battle to help out Cable. But after a few pages, you didn't have Cable being able to grab Garrison Kane and teleport the heck out of there. Now, to wrap up today's video, we do learn where Cable and Garrison Kane were teleported to. They were teleported into the far future, 700 years into the far future, where Manhattan is no longer called Manhattan. It is actually called, well, Applecrust. Either way, for Cable, he tells us that one, he was able to repair Garrison after the big battle against Stryfe, but also there is technology that may give Hammer the ability to walk again. They just have to find it. Now, this section right here does kind of explain where Cable was because, like I said at the very beginning of this video, when it came to the Executioner song, right in the middle of the event, you had Cable arrive like he was gone for a certain period of time. And the reason why? Because he was in the far future with Garrison Kane. But what's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we are going to continue our coverage over the X-Men, but now it's time for us to jump into some Cable comics. Now, this takes place right after the Executioner song because, as we all know, at the end of that crossover, we saw Cable and also Stryfe fall into a time vortex, and we're kind of left to wonder what exactly happened to them after they had fell into that time vortex. And so we're going to cover the first 4 issues of Cable's ongoing series. Oh yeah, that's right. This was Cable's first ongoing series. You see, we had covered Cable's Blood and Metal, and that was Cable's first series, but that was a mini series. This one is going to be an ongoing series. So for the next few, I don't know, playlists for different X-Men crossovers, we're going to cover a lot of X-Men comics involving Cable comics because Cable had a series that went on for a good while alongside the other X titles like X-Factor, X-Men, Excalibur, and so on and so on. Like I said, though, this kind of gives it the idea of Cable coming back, but also kind of making us wonder what happened to Cable after he fell into that time vortex. Now, the first story arc that we are covering today is beginning the process of us learning about the actual origin of Cable. And let me explain. You see, in the early 1990s for Marvel Comics, Cable became really popular to the fans. And I say he was probably just as popular or more popular than Wolverine because to Marvel, they were kind of like, hey, this guy is blowing up. we have to go ahead and give him his own book. But the problem was, though, we did not know the actual origin of Cable. And so over time, the 1990s, you had Marvel begin to give Cable the Wolverine treatment, where over time we'll learn different pieces about the actual origin of Cable. The problem is that for Cable's that most of his origin take place in other books besides his ongoing series. So right now, we're only getting a small sample of his actual origin, but then other books kind of fill in the blanks that we need to know the actual idea of the origin of Cable. But either way, in his first four-part story arc, we are beginning to learn that Cable was part of a different crew. You see, we learned that Cable was working alongside a crew called the Clan Chosen. Now, the Clan Chosen is actually built on the idea of a different group called the Askani. Now, we have not officially talked about that group either, and the Askani first appeared back in, I want to say, X Factor issue number 66 or 67. But in that book right there, we saw one of the members of the Askani take baby Nathan into the far future to save his life. And that was the only time we ever saw them. But we get the idea that they were a group of people from the far future who are fighting Apocalypse in their far future. But by this point, they're no longer around. And so instead, you have the Clan Chosen. Now, the Clan Chosen are not fighting against Apocalypse. They're fighting against the New Canaanites. And I really hope I pronounced that word correctly. I tried my best to make sure I pronounced that word correctly. Now, when it comes to the New Canaanites, they took over where Apocalypse left off at. But either way, we do see the Clan Chosen alongside with Cable trying their best to fight against the New Canaanites. The problem is that by the end of their battle, we learned that Cable had a wife and a son. Now, apparently, his wife got severely injured, so she ended up dying right in the arms of Cable. But the problem was, though, for Cable is that now he told his wife that he'll take care of their son, Tyler. But then he's informed that his son has been kidnapped by Stryfe. And so we're kind of left to believe that Stryfe is working with this new group called the New Canaanites, who again taking over the world where Apocalypse left off at. But now we know that apparently in the far future, Cable was married and he had a son, and his name was Tyler. And the question is now, what happened to Tyler? But then we learn that the entire scene we just saw was actually a hologram being played by Garrison Kane. Now, Garrison Kane is better known as Weapon X. Now, as we all know, in the 1990s, we kind of learned that Wolverine was Weapon X. That was his code name when he went through the actual Weapon X program. But then they gave that name over to, well, Garrison Kane. Now, for Garrison Kane, he was part of Department K, and they turned him into a cyborg after he went through some, so severe injuries. Now, back in Cable's Blood and Metal, he also got again severely injured, and you had Cable take Garrison into the far future, the 39th century, where you have Cable being able to give Garrison Kane a new cyborg body to use. And so he got an upgrade thanks to Cable. But the problem was that Cable went back in time when it came to the Executioner song. Garrison stayed behind the far future. And so with them being left in the future, he's able to go to a library in the future where you are able to pull out different discs to watch different holograms of different moments in time. And so for Garrison, he was able to learn that Cable had a wife and a son named Tyler that was kidnapped by Stryfe. Now, while you have Garrison Kane going back to his home or his base here in the far future, he is attacked by a group of thugs. Now, for Garrison Kane, these thugs do not stand a chance at all. He was able to take them down very easily and go on with his day. But now we have to jump over to General Hate. Now, General Hate is actually the leader of the New Canaanites in the far future in the 39th century. And we actually see him with other members of the actual organization meeting up and talking about Garrison Kane. Now, their problem is that they don't have any information about Garrison Kane at all. They have no idea where he came from. And so for Height, he's kind of like, listen, let's go ahead and send in the flatliners. Now, it seems to me the flatliners are kind of like the police force used in the far future to make sure the people of the city stay in line. And so you have Height tell the flatliners, you better make sure that you kill off Garrison Kane, because if you don't, I'll call somebody else in and that person will most likely kill you. But getting back over to Garrison Kane, we do learn that Garrison Kane has been living with the clan chosen in the far future, the same crew that had worked with Cable in that flashback we saw earlier. Now, when it comes to Garrison Kane, he wants to know more about Tyler Dayspring, the actual son of Cable, and that is when we get another flashback. And so in this flashback, we do learn that Cable and his crew were able to find a hideout that was being used by Stryfe, except once they were able to get into the actual hideout, they find Tyler Dayspring, who is now actually working alongside with Stryfe. Now, we do learn that apparently for Tyler, he was being controlled by another character who kind of made him go a tad bit crazy, but also wanting to work for Stryfe. But we do see Tyler being able to get a hold of Dawn Silk, and we do see him being able to mind link with her. Now, this whole mind link situation is actually really important. The reason why, because you have Cable being able to knock out his son Tyler to save Dawn Silk, but because she was technically mind linked to Tyler, it kind of ruined her speech in a way. And so she is unable to actually talk proper. But you didn't have Cable realize they have to get the heck out of there. And so you have Cable and his crew get the heck out of there, but you have Cable and Stryfe both in this flashback vow to kill one another for different reasons. Now for Cable, we already know why, because what Stryfe did to his son Tyler. But for Stryfe, it's more of like, no, I just want to kill off Cable because this man is always in my way. But once we get back over to the present day, we actually see Garrison Kane kind of understanding what happened to Cable would also happen to Tyler as well. But right after that, you did have our heroes be attacked by, well, the Flatliners. Now, when the Flatliners appear, their main goal is to, well, kill everyone in the room. And so, like in the flashback, in the present day, we see Dawn Silk once again become an actual hostage. Now, luckily for her, Cable arrives. Now, this is a huge moment because, like I said at the very beginning of this video, at the tail end of the Executioner song, we saw Cable and Stryfe both fall into the time vortex, kind of left to wonder what exactly happened to them. But now we see that Cable's okay and he's back with a new hairstyle. Either way, you do have Cable being able to work with the rest of the heroes to get rid of the Flatliners. Now, they do lose their base, and the reason why, because when you kill off a Flatliner, it sets off a bomb that was implanted inside of them. And so they had to leave their base as it got blown up in the sky. Now we jump over to Africa in its far future, where we pick up with General Hate once again, and we actually see him meeting up with a character known as Sincere. Now apparently Sincere had just killed off a group of rebels who were trying to fight against, well, the new Canaanites. Either way, for Sincere, he's now be given a new job by General Hate to go after Cable and also Garrison Kane. Now, we do learn that for Sincere, he is going to accept the job, but at the same time, he still wants to kill off the new Canaanites. And so it kind of seems like he's being forced to actually work for this organization. But when the time comes, sooner or later, he might try to actually kill them. Now, getting back over to our heroes, their main goal is to make sure that the new Canaanites cannot be able to use their new time machine. Now, for our heroes, they believe that the new time machine must be located near Niagara Falls, except once they're able to scan the actual area, they realize the new time machine is inside Niagara Falls, inside a base. Now, for our heroes, they are very concerned about the idea that the new Canaanites might try to send somebody back in time to kind of make sure everything falls in plan for them in the far future to make sure nothing changes in the past that can ruin the control over in the far future. But for our heroes, they got to make sure to get rid of this new time machine that they had built. And so as we get into the second chapter, we actually do pick up with the clan chosen and also Cable attacking the base in Niagara Falls. Now, when they do arrive, well, actually, they were able to sneak into the base, but once they were able to sneak into the actual base and fight their way through some guards, they think that this is going to be an easy job, except when they get into the main part of the base, they are then confronted by more members of the Flatliners. So they have another battle ahead of them against these guys right here. But now we have to jump over to General Hate and the other members of the New Canaanites. Now, when we do, we see Hate basically is tell us that they're going to send Sincere back in time. And the reason why, because he knows that Cable will at least try to go back in time. Now, the only reason why he knows that is because of, well, Garrison Kane. Garrison Kane is not from the future. Sooner or later, you have to send him back home. And so sooner or later, Cable will go back with Garrison back in time. But on top of that, Sincere is going to be there to make sure that Cable cannot prevent anything from happening that will lead up to Apocalypse becoming the actual ruler in the far future in the world. Now, also, Sincere was sent back in time to kill somebody else who had also went back in time as well, better known as the Other. Now, we have no idea who the Other is, but apparently it's somebody very close to Cable. But getting back over to Cable and the others, we do see them continuing to fight against the Flatliners. Now, this battle is more intense because, well, the Flatliners had the advantage over our heroes. And the reason why I'm saying that because, well, the Flatliners brought a whole army with them to fight against our heroes. Now, luckily for Cable, there is a character known as Boak who can use his powers to kind of shut down all their weapons, but to take out all the Flatliners. The only problem is, though, Boak is a robot, and so once he does this move, he'll fall apart completely and would need to be reassembled to come back online. Now, here's a big problem, though, because once he does that and he's able to take out the Flatliners, we have Hope, another member of the Clan Chosen, get very upset with Cable. And the reason why, because she looked at Boak as an actual person, not a robot. But also, she hates the idea that Cable will just use anybody for anything when it comes to him trying to complete a mission. And so she does express how mad she is at him, but either way, they have to continue on. Where you have Hope tell Cable that it seems like the New Canaanites were able to send someone back in time. Now, we already know who that was. That was Sincere. But now for Cable, he thinks it's time for him to go back as well to make sure the past is protected by enemies of the future. And so then we jump back in time where we do pick up with Sincere, and we do learn that who he is looking for. He is actually looking for, well, Mr. Tolliver. Now remember, we're still learning everything about Tolliver, but apparently Tolliver is also from the future as well. But on top of that, the last time we saw Tolliver was when Cable and him fought back in X-Force Comics. I want to say X-Force issue number 15. But either way, we were left to believe that Tolliver had died. But apparently, the Sincere, Tolliver is still alive somewhere in the past. And the question is now, where is he hiding out at? Now, the rest of the second chapter is really being affected by what happened over in X-Force Comics. Now, we have not covered X-Force since we had wrapped up our coverage over the Executioner song, but just know that there is a story arc involving both Cannonball and Sunspot when it comes to the Graymalkin. Now, the Graymalkin is actually a space station that Cable had left behind in the past. Now, the Graymalkin was built in the future, and the Graymalkin is kind of like a base for Cable to use, but also it has all these different weapons that Cable can use out in the field as well. Like I said, though, he left it in the past. And so when you have Hope trying her best to get a hold of the Graymalkin, she can't. And for Cable, it's kind of like what happened to the Graymalkin. Now, over in X-Force Comics, we're kind of left to be told that it had blown up. And so for Cable and Garrison Kane, they're kind of like, we need to go back in time to figure out what happened to the Graymalkin, but also to figure out who in the world is in the past right now, possibly trying to change the timeline. Like, for example, Sincere. And so you have Hope being able to teleport both Cable and Garrison Kane back in time. The problem is, though, when they do arrive at the Graymalkin, for some reason, is at the bottom of the ocean. And the question is right now, why? Now, technically, we are told that it was blown up back in X-Force comics, but for Cable and also for Garrison Kane, they don't know that yet. All they know is that for some reason, the Graymalkin, the space station, or part of the space station, had fallen to the bottom of the ocean. And so, as we dive into the third chapter, we actually pick up with Cable and also Garrison Kane stuck in the Graymalkin, but the Graymalkin is at the bottom of the ocean. And with the power being out, that means Cable is no longer able to actually teleport across the world. He needs the Graymalkin to be active so he can actually teleport across the world. And so, for our two heroes, they kind of believe that this is going to be their end. And so, you have Cable pull out some beer that apparently he had hidden behind some kind of panel, and you have the two characters drink together to spend their last moments with one another. Now, for Garrison, it's kind of like, listen, if I'm going to die, I need to know about your past. And so you have Garrison ask Cable one more time about the actual origin behind Cable's life. But now we have to jump over to G.W. Bridges. Now, G.W. Bridges used to work for S.H.I.E.L.D. when it came to our earlier part of our coverage over X-Force. Now, for G.W. Bridges, he also worked alongside with Cable. You see, over the years, Cable had formed a lot of teams. You had X-Force, you had the Clan Chosen, but you also had the Six-Pack. Now, the Six-Pack took place in the past before X-Force was actually formed. Matter of fact, when Cable first arrived in the past, he formed that team there. Now, Garrison Kane and G.W. Bridges, they were also part of that team as well. But for G.W., after leaving Six-Pack, he joined S.H.I.E.L.D. and then he was assigned to bring down Cable because, well, Cable and X-Force, they broke some laws. Now, for GW, he got word that Cable is dead. But for GW, he still wants to know more secrets about Cable's past, his actual origin. And so we see GW breaking into one of Cable's old bases or one of his old safe houses. Now, for GW, he has to go through some security that Cable had left behind. But once he was able to get through those things, he was then able to access a computer. Now, this book is also beginning to build up the world of Deadpool as well. And the reason why, because we actually pick up with the first appearance of Weasel. Now, for Weasel, he's just minding his business, but Weasel does have connections to Deadpool to the point where he is actually confronted by Sincere. And you have Sincere asking Weasel, hey, where can I find Deadpool? And you have Weasel say, listen, the last I heard is that Deadpool is looking for his ex-girlfriend, Vanessa. And really, we're going to see Vanessa here very soon in this video. But for Weasel, it's kind of like, dude, I have no idea where Cable is at. Sorry, not Cable, where Deadpool is at. But I know one thing. He is currently looking for his ex-girlfriend, Vanessa. Now, getting back over to Garrison Kane and also Cable, you have Cable actually tell us that by this point in our coverage over X-Men comics, he actually believes that he is the clone of Stryfe. Because remember, for a good while there, he had no idea that him and Stryfe had the same face. But then later on, he learned that him and Stryfe did have the same face, but he still believes that he is the clone. And the only reason why, because the way he looks and how powerful Stryfe truly is. If Stryfe looks normal and very powerful, that means Cable must be the clone of Stryfe. But also Stryfe is the son of Cyclops and Jean Grey. Now, we already know that technically that Cable is the actual child of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor, not Cyclops and Jean Grey. But because Madeline is the clone of Jean Grey, it kind of makes Jean Grey the mother of Cable. It gets really weird. But either way, it's Cable saying that he believes that he is a clone of Stryfe. Now, his main goal is still find Stryfe and to hopefully get rid of him. But getting back over to, well, G.W. Bridges, we actually see him with the professor. Now, when I say the professor, I don't mean like Charles Xavier. I really mean more of an AI system that Cable brought from the future to the past to help him out. Now, over time, we're going to learn more about the professor and really the backstory between the professor and another AI system we had in the earlier parts of our coverage over the X-Men. Now, for the professor, he informs G.W. Bridges that technically the Graymalkin is not completely destroyed. Now, like I said earlier, the whole idea of the Graymalkin being destroyed took place over in X-Force comics. So we don't know what exactly went down just yet. But you have Professor tell us like, no, only parts of the Graymalkin is at the bottom of the ocean. The rest of it is still orbiting the Earth at the moment. And also, you have Professor tell GW Cable is not dead. Matter of fact, Cable is well alive at this exact moment. Now, for Sincere, he's still in the past trying to hunt down, well, Mr. Tolliver. But the problem is, no one knows truly where Tolliver is at. And really, for some people out there, they kind of believe that Tolliver is dead. In matter of fact, they're trying to get a hold of his will. And so we see Sincere just fighting against the mercenaries who were trying to get their hands on Tolliver's will. But unfortunately, they won't because, well, they're being killed off by Sincere. Now, the ending of this chapter is pretty funny because we jump back over to Garrison and also Cable, and they're still at the bottom of the ocean, the part of the Graymalkin that's at the bottom of the ocean. But while being inside there, for Garrison, he believes that they are going to die. But then you have Cable tell us that earlier, that panel where he got the beer from, there were some wires in there. He put those wires on his body and, of course, power up the entire place up just like that. And now Cable is allowed to teleport once again across the world. But the first place he teleports to is the same base that G.W. Bridges is at. And let's not forget, there's some bad blood between these two characters. And so as we get into the fourth chapter, we actually pick up with Cable and also GW fighting against each other. Now, the reason why these two characters are fighting against each other is really more about the idea of they have some hatred towards one another for some actual good reasons, but at the same time, it could easily be worked out if the two guys sit down and talk things out. Because for Cable, it's more the idea that GW left Six Pack, didn't join SHIELD, and then after a while begun to hunt down Cable when him and X-Force broke some laws. Now for GW, it's more the idea that while being on the Six Pack, two members of the team got severely injured, Garrison Kane and also, well, Hammer. Now, Garrison Kane, we already talked about. He's basically a cyborg, but that's because of Department K. They were able to fix his body by giving him cybernetic body parts. Now, you do have the two guys being able to stop fighting against one another once you have Garrison step in and say, like, hey, listen, we're on the same side here. Let's just talk some things out. But now we have to jump back over to the rest of Six Pack. Now, like I said earlier, like multiple times by this point, that a lot of things happen over in X-Force comics. But again, we're going to cover that story down the road because most of these stories took place at the same time, and really you would have to jump between each issue of each title to kind of get the full story of everything happening in X-Men comics. And we're not going to do that because then it might get a tad bit confusing and we'll have like many characters all at once. But either way, you had a Six Pack or these three characters come together to hunt down X-Force, but also hunt down Cable. So Domino, Grizzly, and also Hammer. Now, Hammer is the other person who is also severely injured thanks to Cable, to the point where he is mostly paralyzed. Now, there is another character, and that will be Copycat, aka Vanessa. Now, Vanessa is the ex-girlfriend of Deadpool. You see, in the earlier parts of X-Force, when it came to Cable and the rest of X-Force, they believed that Domino was actually there. But in reality, it wasn't Domino, it was Copycat Vanessa pretending to be Domino, while the real Domino was actually a prisoner to Mr. Tolliver. Either way, with all those different things happening, when it comes to these guys, they're trying their best to use the old base, the old equipment of X-Force and Cable to hopefully find Cable and X-Force. Now, getting back over to Garrison, also GW, and well, Cable, they are discussing about what happened to the Graymalkin. Now, again, X-Force is the reason why the Graymalkin had technically exploded. But at this point in our coverage over this story, you have GW saying he believes the Graymalkin must be completely gone now because him and Professor were talking to one another in the last chapter, but then out of nowhere, the Professor disappeared. Now, for Cable, he does not believe that the Graymalkin is completely gone. And the only reason why, because he's still kind of able to talk to other computer programs that are connected to the Graymalkin. And so right now, the only way to figure out what exactly happened to the Graymalkin is to find X-Force and hopefully use X-Force to figure the big secret behind what happened to the Graymalkin. But now we jump over to Sincere. Now, Sincere listening to all different kinds of radio transmission to hopefully find the two targets that he came to pass looking for. Now, we already know one of those targets is actually Tolliver. The other one would be Cable. Now, we are left to believe here that Cable might be the father of Tolliver. Matter of fact, we're left to believe here that Tolliver is Tyler, the long-lost son of Cable, who had apparently came back to the past. Because you have Sincere say, oh, his father is here now too, kind of telling us like, hey, Tolliver is actually the son of Cable. He is Tyler from the future. Now, we jump back over to the six-pack, Grizzly, Domino, and also Copycat. Hammer cannot walk, so he stays out of the vehicle they came inside. Now, while they're trying to smash their way to the old base of X-Force to hopefully find where X-Force is hiding out at now, they run into Cable and his crew. Now, here's the thing. Because once you have Copycat see Cable, she is really excited. And it kind of showed that back then when she was pretending to be Domino, she had actually fell in love with Cable. But for Cable, it's kind of like, you were not Domino though. Like, yes, I'm in love with her. When I found out you were not actually her, that love was no longer around because you're not her. I only care for Domino. And so you have Copycat just disappear once you have Cable kind of break it down for her, like, you were not Domino the entire time where I was expressing my love. Instead, you were pretending to be the woman I actually cared for. Now, once you have our heroes being able to make it back over to the vehicle that Six-Pack came in, you have Hammer try to use the vehicle against Cable by bringing him down to get revenge for what Cable did to him in the past, which is, well, paralyzing him. Now, you do have Garrison stop Hammer saying, listen, Cable understands what he did in the past was completely wrong. But at the same time, he also brought tech back that could possibly help you. Now for Hammer, he does not want anything from Cable at all. And the reason why, because one, he hates Cable, but also because he's afraid, not really afraid, but he does not want to be a machine like Cable is. Because look at Cable. He looks like a cyborg, like he's half machine, half man. And I do not want to be like him. Now you do have everyone split up, and what I mean is that for Cable and also the Six-Pack, they're not really able to reform their old group. And the reason why, because they're kind of wondering, can they actually trust Cable? And you have Cable realize that no, they can't trust him because he understands that he's not really able to open up to them. And so you have Six-Pack go their own way to go find Copycat, while you have Cable, well, tries to go find X-Force. And so this was the first story arc for Cable as we work our way up to Fatal Attractions. But either way, it's now time for us to cover the Deadpool miniseries that came out right after this one. With that being said, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. Also, If you have any suggestions on books I should read, well, please let me know in the comments below because you never know, your suggestion could be a future video down the road. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.